All right, I think we're going to get started here today. I know there's a lot of people on vacation, so if you are on vacation and having a beverage of your choice, then I'm jealous, and thank you for joining us. So welcome to another discovery session with Efficiency Canada and Friends. I'm Natalie Irwin, Director of Stakeholder Engagement here at Efficiency Canada. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to everyone and those of you that are new that our guest will present for approximately 20 minutes before we open the floor to question and answer period. And please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use the chat to just kind of chime in, but the Q&A box is where we're going to get at the questions, or you can raise your hand and I can unmute you, and then you can ask your questions yourself. We do have a pretty hard stop at 12:45 p.m. Eastern time so that everyone can finish their lunch or breakfast or afternoon snack, whatever you're, wherever you are in the country. And without further ado, I am thrilled today to welcome Tara Rezvan, who Client Success Manager at DIVERSIO and Equal30 Champion, who will share insights on advancing diversity and inclusion in the energy sector. Thanks again for joining us today, Tara.
No problem. Super excited to be here. Thank you for the introduction, Natalie. As Natalie mentioned, hello, everyone. I'm Tara. I'm a Client Success Manager at DIVERSIO. And just for some context here, DIVERSIO is a people intelligence platform that uses data to measure and track diversity and inclusion in organizations. We also do some work with kind of broader, consortiums and industry bodies such as Equalby30 to help measure and track that D&I across the entire world and across the globe. So today, my goal is to share with you some of the insights that we gathered from that engagement. And I'm really, really excited that we have a turnout, especially given that it's a Friday. It's really cool that we have people keen and interested to learn. So without further ado, I will jump right in here. Just want to make sure we have time for our questions as well. Oh, there we go. There we go. So in 2020, the global energy sector came together in its commitment to advancing diversity and inclusion. So, we had above 135 energy companies, and that included 12 national governments and 13 industry bodies that were involved in this data processing. I'm just going to adjust the size of the slide here just to make sure it's all, there we go. So you can see the entire slide. And this initiative was led by Natural Resources Canada, and it had a lot of involvement from, companies in the efficiency energy sector as well. So Natalie and I were just having a great conversation about that before you all hopped on. So really, really great to see champions in Equal30 from that sector specifically. To do this engagement and to roll out this assessment, we used our technology and AI to measure diversity and inclusion in energy. So we were able to collect above 62,000 data points across above 9,000 employees worldwide. And it's really important to understand, diversity and inclusion in this situation and how the two terms differ from one another, but then also how the two terms kind of go hand in hand. And that cohesion of the two is ultimately what we drew as a conclusion to help us reach an equal gender representation by 2030, which is kind of the inspiration and the momentum of the initiative. So our initial goal and EB30's predominant, bread and butter was focusing on increasing the number of women in energy. But through this analysis and through all of this, we understood that in order to advance that woman representation, it's also important to pay attention to, racial and ethnic minorities, individuals from the LGBTQ2+ community, and persons with a disability, and any other, underrepresented group in the workforce. Because without kind of paying that close attention, closing those gaps that have, systemically been ingrained in a lot of our societies kind of layout and organization, it's not possible to achieve that representation in the sector. And also taking a look at inclusion, we were able to measure the inclusion in energy by using DIVERSIO's academically validated inclusion framework. And I can share kind of follow-up materials with anyone who's interested. Feel free to reach out at any point. But basically, we have 6 key performance indicators that we use to track and measure inclusion. And that's focusing on employee experience. And our artificial intelligence is actually able to take in those results and analyze them and give out a score. And that score is what we can use to benchmark against industry. So I'm just giving you a high level here of kind of D&I overall in energy and some high level insights. But by looking at our results kind of throughout the next 20 minutes, it would be really cool for everyone on the call to think about these two terms and think about how you think they go hand in hand while still respecting the different meanings of the two terms. Because I know D&I is such a catchphrase. You hear it probably, a couple of times a day now, but it's important to understand what the two terms really mean in and of itself. So taking a look specifically at diversity here, we can take a look at the representation of gender and race and ethnicity in the global energy sector. So obviously we see that women are accounting for 32% of the energy sector, while racial and ethnic minorities account for 22%, and Black and Latinx individuals are underrepresented compared to the population, kind of census population. So you can take a look at this graph here to see that difference and see the representation across. And to really understand the diversity in energy, we were able to use a data scraping tool to collect the names and roles of 6,718 employees across 100 major global energy companies. So obviously, data scraping has its pros and its cons, but the method and the sophisticated open source algorithm we used to process this data is something that was academically validated, by our academic partners, and it is the method of conducting large-scale industry assessments kind of across the board. So we were really making sure that through all of this, the technology and the systems that we're using were status quo in terms of validity and accuracy, because ultimately our goal is to get the most accurate, consistent snapshot of the sector as it stands to create that baseline for moving forward. And we were able to do that through data scraping. So this is kind of the breakdown here, and you can see some of the gender gaps already coming through. Now, taking an even further look at the representation of gender and race and ethnicity, it's really interesting to see how that varies across position levels. We always like to say it's one thing to get the talent in through your doors, but what we really want to focus on doing now is getting that diverse talent in the doors and advancing that talent throughout the organization. And it's clear here to see that we have women at a higher percentage in the entry levels in the sectors. And then as you're going up that hierarchy towards the executive levels, that representation is dropping. So currently, women make up about 39% of the roles at entry level, and then they just represent 26% of all executives and C-suite leaders. So this is signaling a career development gap in the energy sector, and it's actually something that we were able to take a deeper dive on in terms of recommendations and recommended actions for how to close that gap and how to ultimately reach that end goal of being equal in terms of representation by 2030. So another insight that we were able to pull through, and kind of going back to that notion of diversity and inclusion and the difference between the two terms, but also where they intersect, is the importance of focusing on inclusion. So we deployed our survey to the employees of the EB30 signatories, and altogether we had over 50 energy companies participating with about 2,400 employees contributing to the effort. And this survey not only collected information on their demographics and identity, but it also took a look at employee experience and their position within the organization. And by doing a cross tabulation and taking a look at different identities and how they feel in the organization, we were able to draw some really interesting insights on inclusion metrics. And over on the right here, you can take a look at the metrics that we use to measure inclusion. So taking a super high level look at all of them, we have inclusive culture. So this is really signaling an environment where everyone feels heard and valued by their team. We've got fair management. This is looking at how managers manage their teams and if people feel like they have a fair manager who is unbiased in their day-to-day operations. Next up, we have career development, and that's giving your employees an opportunity, and more importantly, having employees feel like they're able to advance through the organization and grow in terms of their professional development skills. Then we have workplace flexibility, which is enabling all employees to establish a healthy work-life balance. this is something that's kind of coming more and more a priority, and something that we're continuing to evolve with, especially with COVID-19 and the nature of work from home and how it's going to look like when we're able to go back into our offices. So we're really keeping a close eye on this, and we'll continue monitoring recommendations as the nature of the world kind of changes with this. And then workplace safety is the last one, which is ultimately ensuring that no employee feels like they are experiencing sexual, psychological, or physical harassment in the organization. And this, this inclusion metric is always at the bottom of our hierarchy in terms of if it's an issue, it needs to be addressed right away. Because as I'm sure we can all understand, it is impossible to achieve an inclusive culture if you have employees that aren't feeling safe. Bottom line, everyone needs to feel safe. And we've established through this engagement with EB30 that energy companies need to achieve high levels in these inclusion metrics in order to cultivate their diverse talent in through the doors and have them progress. So that's kind of the insight that we were able to pull, again, from measuring employee experience. Taking a deeper dive on diversity and inclusion, and especially continuing to look at those key performance indicators for inclusion, we're able to see that generally women of color, women with a disability, and women struggling with a mental health challenge face the greatest barriers in the workplace. And by understanding this, it brings us back to the point that in order to achieve equal gender representation, we need to also be paying attention to racial and ethnic minorities, people who are facing a disability, and people who are struggling with a mental health challenge. Because without doing that, there is a very large population of women who are not going to feel cultivated to grow in an organization and to advance. So that's why this, the scorecard here is really valuable in providing some insights and direction. And I know there's a lot of numbers on the screen and it's a lot to take in. So I'll try and do a super high level summary, point out some interesting key insights that you can take away from this slide here. So our scoring here, again, very consistent. We always do a key performance indicator score out of 10. And this is the score that is populated through our artificial intelligence using the employee experience survey results to generate this. So you can take a look and see that especially in workplace safety, the scores are extremely low for women of color, women with a mental health challenge, and women with a physical disability. So this is signaling that there is opportunity to continue building a safe work environment, and also understanding that without creating that safe work environment, it will be very difficult to achieve high scores in the rest of the key performance indicators. So that's kind of why we are addressing safe work as a very, very key factor in improving inclusion and diversity as well in energy. And then also taking a look, you can see career development is also an opportunity for growth. So we want to make sure that we have environments that are free of harassment so that women feel like they can advance their careers. So taking a look at all of those results, we were able to make some recommendations using, we have our recommendation engine that takes a look at all of the results, the pain points, and with like human touch and human consideration as well. We were able to make some recommendations and some basic places to begin. We always like to make our recommendations as tactical as possible. We believe that everyone should be able to take a look at a recommendation and be like, okay, I feel like I can go to work tomorrow and make a difference, or like I could feel like I can start making change right away. And that's kind of our goal with everything here. So EB30 has also committed to helping the energy sector reach its gender equality goals and meaningfully advance their D&I by rolling out programs, practices, policies, policy templates, all of that good stuff. And we're working with them to kind of make that happen. But at a super high level, I think it's no surprise after looking at all of those scores that investing in growth and development of diverse talent to ultimately advance them into the leadership positions is a very important key place to start, and is currently a challenge for many energy companies. So how we typically recommend accomplishing that is taking a look at formal sponsorship programs. That's a great way for women who are in the entry levels to feel like they're being supported and have someone that they can look up to as they're progressing. And sometimes that may mean it's not someone in your organization that's necessarily your sponsor or mentor, but industry and sector-wide sponsorship programs that connect women in entry levels with women in leadership roles. That's a great place to start, especially because we are missing that representation up at the top. Another way to invest in the growth and development of diverse talent is looking at candidate diversity for recruiting. So there's a lot of strategies out there, and we've shared our recruiting and hiring guide. And we've got a lot, I'd recommend if you're interested in that, take a look at our social media, our website. So we have a lot of articles and tools that we share on there as well. But it's really important to make sure that you're providing an equal opportunity for applicants who are applying for roles. So that's just one way that we really urge companies to diversify their recruiting talent or strategies. And then finally, another one is a leadership development program for underrepresented groups. So it's important to understand that sometimes members from underrepresented groups haven't received the same level of education and the same exposure to leadership just because of historic systemic barriers that they may have faced. So by rolling out leadership development programs, this is a great way to set that baseline and give that equal opportunity for everyone. And then the next step here is addressing your unconscious bias among peers and managers, as well as setting an inclusive tone from the top. So making sure that your managers are unbiased in their day-to-day operations. Even a public commitment from executives, setting that tone from the top can really, really signal that it's a priority for an organization and will ultimately make your diverse talent feel more included in the organization. Another great way to signal this commitment is actually having a chief inclusion and diversity officer who's able to prioritize D&I initiatives and be there as a support for anyone who may feel underrepresented in their workplace. And then, of course, we want to take a very serious focus on combating the harassment and microaggressions experienced by women, people of color, and those with a disability and mental health challenge. So to do this, having targeted anti-harassment and discrimination policies that are made very clear to all employees. Another great one is allyship training for employees, teaching employees how to be an ally on a day-to-day basis and helping them understand how they can make the biggest difference in the experience of the individuals around them. And then also rolling out workplace inclusion surveys to understand and measure if there's still harassment being faced by folks, because that anonymity piece is very, very important, especially when you're looking at workplace safety, because you want to make sure that you have processes in place for people to comfortably come forward with any feeling of harassment or unsafe feelings in the workplace. Something that we do for a lot of companies is recommending some sort of using technology to measure and track D&I over time. This is something that is really important because we always say you can't do what can't be measured. So in order to accomplish your goals and in order to reach that equal representation, you want to be able to track the impact of your sponsorship programs. So taking a look at inclusion scores and seeing if it's increasing over time, little things like that. And that's kind of why I resonate so well with working at DIVERSIO. And the thing that's most important to me is it's about that ongoing effort, and it is not a checkbox exercise. So that's why we really urge companies who are taking a stance and making that commitment to track and measure their D&I over time. So I'll kind of, wrap it up there. In summary, Equal30 was a great way for, our entire world to essentially come together and make a commitment to gender representation. And along the way, we also identified how important inclusion is to achieving that diversity representation. And I think that's the biggest takeaway here, is that you can't cultivate a diverse represented talent or workforce or pipeline without starting off from the top and having that commitment from leadership and creating that inclusive culture where your talent's able to grow. So I would love to have a discussion now about any questions that people may have, whether it's about EB30 specifically, any of the recommendations that were made. Would love to open it up to the floor.
Thank you so much, Tara. That was so insightful and great to, like you said, if we exactly did you say? The term is, if you don't measure it, you can't benchmark it. You don't know if the change is happening, essentially. So nice to see some benchmarking that's being done for sure. I'm going to actually open the floor to Nick. I see he was the first. Oh, maybe he lowered his hand now after I sent him a message. So we'll get to you in a minute, Nick, if you do still have your question, but I'm going to throw it back then to open the Q&A. So a reminder to people, we do have the same rule as our presenters to keep it to questions only, no sales pitches, please. And that includes statements disguised as questions, of course. So we're going to skip over Nick right now and go to Farah. Is in measuring employee satisfaction, I believe it's important to measure women and men. However, I notice that this is very binary approach. In the future, I recommend measuring non-binary presence, transgender fluid individuals and others. I believe the data will be a lot more representative in an informative way as this. Do you want to add anything to that, Tara?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question, and I completely agree with you. One of the kind of the data points that we were able to extract was actually, looking at different sexual orientations, and that was actually part of the survey as well. Just for the kind of overview and high level presentation that I brought forward today, and EB30's focus was taking a look at male and female representation. But I do believe that moving forward, they are planning on expanding that and creating a more or focusing on representation beyond just the binary focus. And we did actually collect data on those metrics as well. So if you're interested, feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to walk you through the specifics of that data as well and the percentages there. Tara@diversio.com. If you're ever interested, happy to chat.
And then also, if you can't remember Tara's email address, just email myself or info@efficiencycanada.org and we'll connect the two of you as well. A second question here is actually from David, is how can these metrics insightful and analysis apply to smaller companies? So anyone under, for example, 100.
For sure. Great question as well. We've typically noticed that size of company doesn't typically impact inclusion, just because setting an inclusive culture and having an inclusive culture is very consistent regardless of employee size. So that's kind of our status quo there, and something that we message across. So no matter how big you are, you could have inclusion problems, and no matter how small you are, you could also have inclusion problems. So that's just kind of our statement there, and something that we look at.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You could be a team of two, and you could still have issues for sure. So another question here is from David, is given the technical nature of energy company work, do we need more women, and other groups to pursue engineering education? And I'm just going to add that Krim did comment on that he actually would be surprised if the majority of energy company employees are technical. So I would agree with that, just in case Tara is not familiar with the various groups there.
For sure. That's a great point as well. Again, on our overall analysis, because we did collect role levels and departments, we were able to see kind of the diversity and inclusion vary across different departments. And I will say the technical roles are more heavily dominated by males as it stands right now. So for example, something like a sponsorship program can also be rolled out to women in education. And actually a discussion that we're always having is how can we start as young as possible? So, through partnerships with universities and all of that kind of stuff is, it's like a really great way. And I know that a lot of universities have been making a stronger effort to expose women to energy sectors and energy industries. And also, starting even in grade school and high school, exposing, girls to STEM and the more technical fields. And I think there's been a really strong push in that, but it's still something that the momentum is going to keep going in. And I presume that over the next few years, that push from a younger age will continue to build and grow.
Yeah, I hope so. I think so for sure. I know something that Efficiency Canada does is that to ensure that we have not the usual suspects that apply for jobs is that we make sure that we have DEI in our applicants as well. So, and if we don't have, for example, an Indigenous person that applied for a new job that we posted, we will make sure that we repost, because we feel that that's not and the applicant's fault, that's our own fault, that we need to get it out and ensure that there are at least applicants from a
Yeah.
wide range of sectors and people.
That's a good point there, Natalie. Just one more thing on that is something we've noticed is that the diverse talent is out there. It's just a matter of how to raise awareness and how to promote your job postings and stuff to appeal to diverse talent. So for example, having a D&I statement at the beginning of your job posting, something as simple as that can really set the tone for culture. But then in addition to that statement, also ensuring that you're living up to your words and you're living up to what you're committing to, basically. So little things like that. And also word of mouth. If your employees feel very safe, heard, and comfortable in your organization, oftentimes, especially with your diverse talent, that will get out and that will become a really strong representation for your company, for your organization. So that's also a great way to attract diverse talent and get them kind of in through the doors.
Definitely. And also with volunteering, if you have any volunteer roles, and make sure
sure.
that your volunteers are diverse as well. And then that will help, because sometimes volunteers become employees as well. Another question here. And so Nick is having trouble with his video and audio, but he was able to type in the chat. And Nick is actually on the board for Step Up, which is a group that the Equal30 team works with. They are a not-for-profit organization, which is they advance women in the energy sector, or energy management sector across Canada. So his question is around how are the companies included in the Equal30 data representative of the broader Canadian energy sector? So would these trends be similar specifically for Canada?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we did a bit of an analysis, kind of taking a look at, because we had a lot of countries kind of involved. We made sure that everything we were saying is something that can be consistent across all countries. And we were ultimately seeing that safe work and career development be the standout across everyone. So definitely Canada as well. But obviously, so that's why kind of we went with that with this general presentation, is because we wanted to make sure we were covering all of our bases. If you're interested in, Canada and specific nuances, in addition to those two things, we can definitely take a deeper dive. Even like we have all of our, our Canadian signatories can take a look at specific data for that. So happy to again have that conversation offline if you're interested. But we do have the data to look at Canada specific.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Tara. It's good to know. I see another question that's coming here from Pamela is, are there good resources or resources that you'd recommend on developing industry-wide sponsorship programs?
For sure. We actually, we have a bit of a step-by-step kind of sponsorship program resource that I'm happy to share with anyone interested kind of offline again. But overall, making sure that it's accessible above everything, making sure that everyone knows about it, everyone feels comfortable signing up for it, making sure that the individuals that are doing the sponsoring have the proper tools and resources to be the best sponsor they can be. And then also making sure that it's something that you need to have someone moderating it and making sure that the impact is happening. So whether that's following up with the sponsors and asking them if they've set up calls or asking them if they've reached out, that follow-up action is ultimately what is really, really important in its early stages to ingrain it into a culture and to really make it happen. But again, happy to share, like we have our own resource, but also there's a lot online, and also reaching out to people who have already done it, because sometimes listening to kind of candid stories and hearing about challenges that were faced by other people can help you craft it in a way that makes the most sense for your organization.
Definitely. And on a related note, Brock has a question to what we were kind of discussing earlier, Tara, is where could these jobs be posted in correlating and reaching diverse candidates? Do we have any suggestions?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. Something that we're actually exploring, or kind of on a personal note, I'm exploring myself, is looking at different associations that represent underrepresented groups, and seeing if there's any opportunity to partner with them and have them share your job postings, kind of have them like reach out to people for you. Little things like that will continue to like build the validity and make people feel comfortable. But again, it's important that you're living up to inclusive culture and you're in order to like attain that. But that's just one way. Also making sure that you're making public job postings to begin with. I know it's very simple, especially, you know, in this day and age with everyone being connected on social media to get jobs or to hire through referrals and through all of that good stuff. But really important to also have public job postings that are kind of available to everyone to reach out to. That's just kind of a starting point there.
Yes, I definitely, the different associations is a great one. I know Good Works is a great resource, no affiliation at all. I know that we use them and have had success with them as well. But it's really important to share with your networks, but also reach out to organizations that you wouldn't necessarily reach out to as well. And just not wait to the time that you're hiring to reach out to those groups as well. Reach out to them and just have conversations on a regular basis as well. I can see there's a question here from CD is, you mentioned earlier that DIVERSIO tracks a company's DEI progress based on employees' experience. Can you walk us through how that is done? So are employees surveyed and how is this information gathered?
For sure. Great question. Maybe I'll do a quick walkthrough of our methodology in terms of survey and data collection. So our pulse survey is a quick 4-minute survey. And the reason we're able to keep it short is because of the sophisticated technology that we use to analyze the data. So we have 5 questions that are centered around employee experience. And each question is tied back to one of the key performance indicators that we kind of looked at today. So that's how we are able to measure employee experience, by taking those results and using an artificial intelligence to analyze that data and then giving that score out of 10, but then also benchmarking that score against, you know, companies similar in size or companies similar in region and country, all of that kind of stuff, and taking a look at how a company does in comparison. And then the second half of the survey is focused on diversity. So that's where we measure the identity of an individual and we collect data on race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, disability, mental health, all of that stuff. And our artificial intelligence also takes a look, in order to give that inclusion score, also takes a look at how diverse talent is doing on the 6 key performance indicators. So that cross tabulation of identity in addition to employee experience leads to a lot of our insights. And it ultimately comes down to that 4-minute pulse survey.
That's great. I have another question here that's really great from Nick, and I'm interested in your answer or your opinion. Tara, is many companies actually include their DEI programs or / incentives in their HR team. They embed them. But what are the benefits of having a unique team or committee focused on DEI? For example, a chief inclusion officer, that is their role, versus having it in an HR team. Is there, I'm sure there are pros and cons to each.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. In terms of the relationship between the two, there's definitely a need for a lot of cross work. If you do have a D&I champion or a chief diversity inclusion officer, they will definitely need to be working very closely with HR, simply because, especially with, you know, career development and safe work, a lot of the policies and initiatives that are being rolled out directly have to do with human resources. Now, the reason it's always great to have someone there kind of directly championing it is because it is something that is still fairly new to the workforce right now. Diversity and inclusion is very top of mind right now, but it's also important to remember that it's still pretty new when you're considering like the past, you know, however many years of HR processes and systems that have been ingrained into a typical corporate energy company process. So that's why having someone who's specifically focused, it's almost like having a lens. It's having someone whose job is fully to just be a diversity and inclusion lens when you're rolling out new initiatives or when you're looking at policies and making adjustments. So I'd say that's the pro there. The only con could potentially be the disconnect, but I think that can be mitigated by ingraining the role as much as possible into an HR team, and having them meet regularly with your HR and having them be a part of the process as much as possible.
That's great advice, Tara. I also think, would you say that there's been a change or more willingness because of the whole remote work environment that's happening, that people now have access to different jobs than they would have been able to apply for? And then also and vice versa, companies can now reach different
Yeah.
potential for candidates because of this.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because of remote work, I think the talent pool that HR in an organization is able to access has grown and has just expanded exponentially. Like the world is literally your oyster now, when you're looking at hiring and recruiting. So it's even more important to have that lens there, to make sure there's someone like frequently reviewing the processes. And also in terms of having a D&I champion, a chief diversity and inclusion officer, it sets a really strong tone from the top for employees that may be hesitant entering the workforce or entering an organization because, you know, maybe they've heard that it's not somewhere that supports racialized folks, for example. Having like that if that reputation is something that is out there, getting someone at the top to really help with a cultural reset and having that be like the sole purpose of their job, to reset the culture and create an inclusive environment and address these gaps, can set a really strong tone for recruiting and attracting diverse talent. So I think that's ultimately a driving factor of why, you know, having these people up at the top is really, really important, in building that inclusive culture and achieving the representation.
Exactly. And I would also add having things like flexible work hours is really important, because that will allow a lot of candidates who have to, for example, pick up kids or drop off kids, or
Yeah.
just have elderly parents that they have to look after, that they can't do the regular 9 to 5, but it doesn't mean that they're not a fantastic and even harder working employee. So I would just say set your career or your job up to hire the right people as well, to make
Yeah.
it inclusive.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, Natalie, you nailed that. Something we always talk about is core hours, for example. So that's setting a certain time frame, like in the middle of the day, where you have your internal meetings and scheduling, but then giving employees flexibility to work, you know, the remaining 3 or 4 hours whenever works for them. So whether that's early in the morning or whether that's like later at night, whatever works for them in their personal life schedule. And it's actually been proven that having something like that in place improves productivity in the workplace and it doesn't set anyone back. So something definitely to explore, and an interesting point to look at, because you're right. It's about laying out the foundation, and making sure that the inclusive culture, like everything is in place to create an inclusive culture and a welcoming environment, in order to attract that talent in, because you don't want to have that representation and then have them feel like they're not a part of something, feel excluded, feel marginalized. That's exactly what we're trying to stray away from. So by having all of these programs, policies in place as soon as possible, you'll be able to attract that talent, kind of accordingly.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and so I'm just noticing the time here, so I'm just going to end there. But one last question for you, Tara, is if you could share one last message with everyone here today, that you hope kind of people took away from your presentation, what would that message be?
For sure. That's a great question. I think the biggest thing, and something that's kind of a personal driving force for me, especially, is the relationship between diversity and inclusion. And that fact, and I feel like a broken record, I feel like I've said this a million times, but you really do need to cultivate an inclusive culture in order to build a diverse workforce. And I really, really hope that everyone kind of takes that away. And it's also the fact that everyone plays a part in creating an inclusive culture, which is why I love it the most. I think when you're looking at an organization, there are some things that, you know, your managers decide. There's some things that your leaders and the executive, have a say in, and no one else really. But building an inclusive culture is something that every single individual, no matter what job you have, no matter where you are in the hierarchy, plays a role in. And I think that that's really valuable. And I think it's really important for everyone to kind of take that responsibility with them, take a look at their positionality, and think about how they can be an ally in the workforce and how they can contribute to building that inclusive culture. So that's kind of my takeaway and my big driving force, especially when you're looking at the energy sector, efficiency energy as well, where you're looking at attracting that diverse talent and where we've identified that it is a gap. So now how do we build that inclusive culture to ultimately close it? So that's kind of my long-winded takeaway.
Well, that's a definitely important takeaway, and so I'm glad you added that, Tara. And I will be remiss as well. Back to the career section question is that Efficiency Canada is actually going to be coming out with a career hub in the fall where people can post job postings on there. So, and one of our goals is to make sure that there is diversity inclusion in the promotion of that career hub as well as the job. So that's something that we are working on. So I'm letting you in on that will be a place. So that will be part of my answer next time. So thank you again, Tara, for joining us today and jumping in kind of last minute as your colleague couldn't make it here today. Really appreciate it. You did a fantastic job. Love the insights. I encourage everyone to join Equal by30. The website is on the screen, or you can go to our website and we have it there. We're big fans of the Equal by30 or 50by30 challenge. More on that coming probably in August from us. And always, so next week, we're going to be joined by Efficiency One. So giving the challenge to achieve net zero in Nova Scotia, Efficiency One, in collaboration with Ralph Torrey, has authored a white paper that's going to be coming out very soon. So you might get a sneak peek at next week's discovery session. It explores the technological and related challenges and opportunities inherent in achieving a steep decline in greenhouse gas emissions, and also identify some strategies on how they're going to achieve net zero by 2050. So another great one as always. Thank you again, Tara, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Bye, everyone. It was a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.